August 27th, 1941, 80 miles south of Iceland, North Atlantic. The gray steel hull of U-570 broke through the surface like a breaching whale, seawater cascading off its conning tower as compressed air hissed through the ballast tanks. Inside the cramped control room, Captain Lieutenant Hans Joachim Romlo steadied himself against the periscope housing, his face pale and glistening with sweat that had nothing to do with the tropical heat of a U-boat's interior. For the past 18 hours, his crew had been trapped underwater, breathing recycled air that tasted of diesel and desperation, while the boat pitched and rolled in seas so violent that even the most seasoned sailors had succumbed to nausea. "Surface achieved, Herr Kalun," reported the chief engineer, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Romlo nodded, already climbing toward the conning tower hatch. He needed fresh air. They all did. U-570 was one of the newest Type 7C boats in the Kriegsmarine's Atlantic Fleet, commissioned just 3 weeks earlier at Kiel. This was their first war patrol, his first command, and it had been a disaster from the moment they'd cleared the Norwegian coast. The North Atlantic storm had caught them in its grip like a malevolent god, tossing the 769-ton submarine as though it were a child's toy. Half the crew was green, barely trained, and the violent motion had rendered them nearly useless. But they were up now. The storm was breaking. Romlo pushed open the hatch and hauled himself onto the bridge, filling his lungs with cold Atlantic air. The sky was still gray, clouds hanging low over choppy seas, but the worst had passed. He turned to scan the horizon. Standard procedure, always check for threats before. The roar hit him before he saw it. A mechanical thunder that turned his blood to ice. "Aircraft! Starboard beam!" The words tore from his throat as the Lockheed Hudson bomber materialized from the cloud base, no more than a mile away and closing fast. Squadron 269 of RAF Coastal Command. Romlo's mind cataloged the details even as panic seized his chest. 400 yards. 300. The Hudson's nose was pointed directly at them, and he could see the bomb bay doors already open. "Alarm! Dive! Dive!" He was screaming now, scrambling for the hatch. But he knew. God help them. He knew it was already too late. The crew below was exhausted, disoriented, still recovering from the storm. The boat was barely stabilized. They would never get under in time. Romlo heard the whistle of falling ordnance and threw himself through the hatch. The world exploded. Section 2. The first bombs fall. Squadron leader James Thompson had been flying patrol patterns for 6 hours when his navigator, Sergeant Leslie Bavistock, spotted the dark shape breaking the surface. Thompson was 32 years old, a career RAF officer who'd logged more hours hunting U-boats than he cared to count, and he knew an opportunity when he saw one. The submarine was caught on the surface, vulnerable, and from the frantic movement on its conning tower, they'd been spotted. Contact confirmed. U-boat surfaced, going in for attack run. Thompson's voice was calm on the intercom, his hands steady on the controls as he banked the Hudson into a diving approach. This was what they'd trained for, what every Coastal Command pilot dreamed of. U-boats were the scourge of the Atlantic, strangling Britain's supply lines, and catching one on the surface was like striking gold. The Hudson's Rolls-Royce engines howled as Thompson pushed the throttles forward. Through the bomber's nose, he could see the submarine growing larger, its deck gun unmanned. Crewmen tumbling down the conning tower hatch in obvious panic. 800 feet. 600. He toggled the bomb release. "Bombs away!" 4 depth charges tumbled from the Hudson's belly, their trajectories calculated to straddle the U-boat's hull. Thompson pulled hard on the stick, the bomber's frame groaning as he climbed away from the surface. Behind him, the charges hit the water in precise succession, one ahead of the submarine, 2 alongside, 1 astern. The explosions lifted columns of white water 100 feet into the air. The sea around U-570 erupted in a fury of spray and concussion. Through the rain-streaked windows, Thompson caught a glimpse of the submarine's hull lifting from the water, then slamming back down at an angle. "Did we sink her?" called the wireless operator from the rear compartment. Thompson circled back, losing altitude for a closer look. The U-boat was still afloat, but something was wrong. It wallowed in the waves, listing heavily to port, and there was no sign of it attempting to dive. More concerning, or interesting, depending on one's perspective, figures were emerging from the conning tower. Not scrambling to man the deck gun, not preparing to defend their vessel, they were waving. "Sir," Babystock's voice was uncertain. "Sir, I think they're waving a white flag." Thompson brought the Hudson lower, close enough to see clearly. It was true. Someone on the conning tower had produced a white shirt or perhaps a tablecloth and was frantically waving it at the British bomber. Other crewmen had their hands raised in the universal gesture of surrender. "Christ," Thompson muttered. "They're giving up." Inside U-570, the situation was catastrophic. The depth charge explosions had caught the boat while the lower hatch was still open, and seawater had poured into the control room before they could seal it. Worse, the concussions had ruptured pipes throughout the pressure hull, and chlorine gas, the deadly byproduct of seawater mixing with battery acid, was now filling the forward compartments. "Everyone aft! Move! Move!" Romlo shouted, his throat already burning from the gas. The crew stumbled over each other in the narrow passageway, coughing and retching, their eyes streaming with tears. The lights flickered and died as electrical systems shorted out. In the darkness, lit only by emergency lanterns, the U-boat had transformed from a weapon of war into a death trap. The chief engineer appeared at Romlo's side, his face a mask of grim determination. "We can't dive, Herr Kalun. The trim system is damaged, and we're taking on water. If we try to submerge, we'll go straight to the bottom." Romlo felt his command, his career, his honor disintegrating around him. He was 25 years old. He'd been entrusted with one of Germany's most advanced submarines and a crew of 43 men, and now, on his first patrol, after less than 2 weeks at sea, he faced an impossible choice. "How long until we can effect repairs?" The engineer shook his head. "Hours, maybe days, and that's assuming the chlorine doesn't kill us first." Above them, they could hear the Hudson circling. Every few minutes, the bomber would roar past low overhead, a reminder that escape was impossible. If they abandoned ship, they would die of exposure in the frigid North Atlantic. If they stayed aboard, the gas would kill them, or the aircraft would finish what it had started. And if by some miracle they got the boat functional again, there was no way to dive, no way to fight, no way to run. Romlo climbed back to the conning tower, where several of his officers had already gathered. The wind had picked up, driving spray across the bridge, and the Hudson was turning for another pass. "Kalun, we must surrender," said his first watch officer, Oberleutnant Bernhard Berndt. "There is no alternative." Surrender? The word tasted like poison in Romlo's mouth. Give up a Type 7C boat? Hand over one of the Kriegsmarine's newest submarines to the British? It's unthinkable. "It's survival," Berndt countered. "Look at the crew. Half of them can barely stand. We have no power, no diving capability, and that aircraft could sink us with its next pass. If we don't surrender, we're sending 43 men to their deaths for nothing." Romlo looked at the faces around him, young men, most of them barely out of training. His responsibility, his burden. He thought of Admiral Dönitz, the U-boat commander who demanded absolute commitment from his captains. He thought of the oath he'd sworn. And then he thought of the chlorine gas seeping through his boat and the cold water waiting below. He stripped off his white shirt. "Signal the aircraft," he said quietly. "We surrender." Squadron leader Thompson couldn't believe what he was seeing. In all his years of anti-submarine patrols, he'd never encountered anything like this. U-boats fought. They dove. They maneuvered. They fired back when they could. They sank with their flags flying, or scuttled themselves before capture. They didn't surrender. But this one had. Thompson keyed his radio, patching through to RAF Coastal Command headquarters in Iceland. This is Hudson S. for Sugar of 269 Squadron. We have a U-boat on the surface, approximately 80 miles south of Iceland. The crew is displaying white flags and signals of surrender. Repeat, the enemy submarine is attempting to surrender. Request immediate surface vessel assistance. The response crackled back through his headset, the duty officer's voice tight with disbelief. Say again, S for Sugar. Did you say the U-boat is surrendering? Affirmative. I'm maintaining patrol overhead. The vessel appears damaged and unable to dive. I count multiple personnel visible on deck, all showing surrender posture. Understood. We're scrambling surface vessels. Maintain contact. Do not let them scuttle. Do not let them scuttle. That was the key, Thompson realized. Whatever damage his depth charges had inflicted, the U-boat was still afloat. If the Royal Navy could reach it before the Germans changed their minds, or before the sea claimed it, they would have something unprecedented, an intact, modern German submarine. Thompson settled the Hudson into a steady orbit around U-570, close enough to keep the Germans honest, far enough to avoid any desperate action. Below him, the submarine wallowed in the swells, its crew huddled on the conning tower and forward deck. Some were clearly injured. Others looked simply defeated. Hours passed. Thompson's fuel gauge crept lower. He radioed for relief, and another Hudson from 269 Squadron arrived to take over the watch. Then another. The RAF was taking no chances. As darkness fell, a Catalina flying boat appeared, carrying powerful searchlights that turned the night into day, keeping the U-boat pinned like a specimen under glass. On U-570's deck, Romlo and his crew endured. The temperature dropped. The wind picked up. Waves broke over the hull, soaking them with icy spray. Some men tried to shelter in the conning tower, but the chlorine gas was still thick below, forcing them back into the open. They had no food, no dry clothes, no hope of rescue from their own side. All they could do was wait and pray that the British would arrive before hypothermia, or the sea finished what the depth charges had started. The armed trawler HMS Northern Chief arrived at first light on August 28, 1941, after steaming through the night at full speed. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander H.O. Ecclestone, approached the German submarine with extreme caution. Surrendered or not, a U-boat was still dangerous. One torpedo, one scuttling charge, and the prize would slip beneath the waves forever. Maintain distance, Ecclestone ordered. Signal them to abandon ship into their dinghies. We'll pick them up once we've secured the boat. But the Germans had other ideas. As Northern Chief drew closer, it became clear that U-570's crew had no intention of leaving their vessel. They clustered on the deck, shivering and exhausted, but they stayed put. Romlo, standing on the conning tower, understood the implications. If they abandoned ship, the British would board immediately and take possession. But if they remained aboard, they controlled access, and they retained the option, however remote, of scuttling. The standoff continued through the morning. More Royal Navy vessels arrived. The destroyers, HMS Burwell and HMS Niagara, then the submarine HMS Seawolf. A small armada now surrounded U-570, and still the Germans refused to leave. The seas were growing rougher. The U-boat was settling lower in the water. Time was running out. Finally, Ecclestone made his decision. He would send a boarding party. 3 sailors from Northern Chief volunteered, 2 telegraphists and a stoker. None of them trained for this kind of operation. They climbed into a small boat and rowed toward the submarine, approaching from astern. The seas tossed the tiny craft like a cork, and twice they nearly capsized before reaching U-570's hull. The German crew watched them come, silent and hollow-eyed. No one moved to help. No one moved to hinder. The British sailors scrambled onto the U-boat's deck, slipping on the wet steel, and made their way to the conning tower. One of them carried a white ensign, the flag of the Royal Navy, and he planted it firmly on the conning tower rail. U-570 was now a prize of war. Over the following days, a remarkable salvage operation unfolded. The weather deteriorated again, battering the damaged submarine and the ships trying to save it. Seawolf attempted to take U-570 inches tow, but the line parted in heavy seas. Northern Chief tried next, with more success. Slowly, painfully, the captured U-boat was dragged toward Iceland, arriving at Svalfjörður on August 29, 1941. What the British found, when they finally explored the submarine's interior, exceeded their wildest hopes. In their panic and haste to surrender, Romlow's crew had failed to destroy most of their classified materials. Codebooks were recovered, operational orders, charts marked with patrol routes and rendezvous coordinates, technical manuals for the Type 7 systems. It was an intelligence windfall of staggering proportions. But the real prize was the boat itself. British naval architects and engineers swarmed over U-570, measuring, photographing, disassembling. Every aspect of German submarine technology was laid bare. The hull construction, the diesel engines, the electric motors, the torpedo tubes, the sound equipment. Most crucially, they examined the U-boat's maximum diving depth capabilities and its vulnerabilities. The submarine was repaired, refitted, and commissioned into the Royal Navy on September 19, 1941, with the deliberately mundane name HMS Graph. The designation was chosen to disguise the vessel's true origin, just another submarine in the fleet, nothing to attract special attention. But Graph was far from ordinary. She became a training platform for anti-submarine warfare, allowing Royal Navy crews to experience firsthand how a U-boat handled, how it sounded, how it behaved underwater. British scientists used her to test and refine depth charge settings, determining the optimal detonation depths to crack a U-boat's pressure hull. Every weakness they discovered was catalogued and exploited. Graph even went on combat patrols, operating in the North Sea and the Bay of Biscay. The sight of her on the surface caused confusion among German forces. She looked exactly like one of their own, and this resemblance was occasionally useful for intelligence gathering. For Captain Lieutenant Hans Joachim Romlow and his crew, capture meant prisoner of war camps in Canada and Britain. They were the subject of intense interrogation, though most knew little of strategic value. Romlow himself faced a different kind of imprisonment, the knowledge that he would forever be remembered as the captain who surrendered a U-boat without firing a shot. After the war, Romlow was court-martialed by a German naval court. The proceedings were bitter and controversial. Some argued he'd had no choice, that remaining aboard would have meant the death of his entire crew. Others insisted that a U-boat captain's duty was clear: fight, flee, or sink your vessel, but never surrender. The court ultimately acquitted him, acknowledging the impossible circumstances, but the stigma remained. The broader impact of U-570's capture rippled through the Battle of the Atlantic. The intelligence gleaned from the submarine contributed to improved British anti-submarine tactics and technology. Combined with other breakthroughs, including the capture of Enigma machines and codebooks from other U-boats, the Allies gradually turned the tide against Dönitz's wolf packs. Admiral Karl Dönitz himself was reportedly furious when he learned of U-570's capture. In a war where the Kriegsmarine operated on razor-thin margins, losing a modern submarine and its technological secrets to the enemy was a catastrophic blow. It wasn't just the loss of one boat, it was the knowledge that every Type 7C, now sailing the Atlantic, carried vulnerabilities the British understood in intimate detail. HMS Graph continued to serve until March 1944, when she ran aground off the west coast of Scotland during a training exercise. The damage was too severe to repair economically, and rather than salvage the vessel, the Royal Navy let the sea claim her. She was scrapped where she lay, her hull broken up and scattered across the Scottish seabed. The story of U-570's surrender remains one of the most unusual episodes of World War II's submarine war. It stands as a testament to the thin line between survival and duty, the fog of war's unpredictable nature, and how a single moment, one well-placed depth charge attack, one exhausted captain's decision can change the course of history. In the brutal arithmetic of the Atlantic campaign, U-570 became HMS Graph, and in that transformation, the submarine that surrendered without a fight proved more valuable to the Allied cause than if she had sunk a dozen merchant ships.